We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis and Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 21b. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, when you have an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yisrael, is there halach in that situation that the Karov redeems, that the relative redeems the Eved Ivri? And the Gemara brought a proof from a Brisa. The Brisa said that the Pasuk says B'chol Geula Titnu, and it includes Eved Ivri. And the Gemara assumed, doesn't it mean to say that it includes an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yisrael? That the Pasuk of B'chol Geula Titnu is saying there's a halacha of the relative redeeming by an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yisrael. And the Gemara said, no, not necessarily. It could be what the Brisa means to include as an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew. The Gemara says, what do you mean, an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew? It's an explicit pasuk. It talks about the fact that Dodo, Ben Dodo, that the various relatives, they redeem the Eved Ivri. And so the Gemara says, Hahu lakovo chova. The Gemara says, you're right, when it comes to an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew, there is an explicit pasuk, but the pasuk of B'chol Geula Titnu says that it's an obligation in that situation. It's an obligation for the relative to redeem the Eved Ivri, va'afilu Rabbi Yoshua, even according to Rabbi Yoshua, meaning to say, when the Eved Ivri is sold to the non-Jew, it could have been that you would understand it's voluntary for the Karov to redeem, and we're saying, no, it's an obligation, even according to Rabbi Yoshua. Rashi explains, Hahu B'chol Geula Titnu Tola Bekra L'kovo Chova. The reason of the pasuk of B'chol Geula Titnu, the reason the Bryce is bringing that pasuk is to say that it is a requirement for the relative to redeem the Eved Ivri in that case. V'afilu Rabbi Yoshua, and even according to Rabbi Yoshua, this is Rabbi Yoshua earlier, D'amar Gabe Stei Achuza Rishus, he says that when it comes to a Stei Achuza, the relative redeeming the field is just a Rishus. But Hacha Modeh, but over here by an Eved Ivri, here he admits that it's an obligation, the Chov, it's an obligation, to Lo Yitama B'ov De Kochavim, that way he will not be assimilated within the idol worshippers. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof again to the question on the previous Amud. If you have an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Yisrael, is there an obligation for the Karov, or does the Karov redeem that Eved Ivri? The Gemara says, Ma Talmud Lomer Yigolenu, Yigolenu, Yigolenu. This is a Brisa. Why does the pasuk say 3 times Yigolenu, 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 Gimel Pa'amim? It says it 3 times. Why does it say it 3 times? L'rabos kol ha'geulos shenegalos keseder hazeh, to include all kind of redemptions that they should also have. They should also be redeemed in this fashion, meaning that you have relatives that they do the redemption. And so what does that mean? What are these geulos that we're talking about? My love, is it not? Batei or echoma ve'eved ivri hanimkar liYisrael. Aren't we talking about the houses in walled cities? The discussion on the previous summit was also about the houses in the walled cities, even though here the question is particular to eved ivri hanimkar liYisrael. So isn't that what we're saying over here? That by an eved ivri hanimkar liYisrael, that we're saying that there is a concept of the relatives redeeming. And the Gemara said, lo, no, batei chatzeirim ustei achuza. This is similar to the Gemara in the previous summit. Again, the Gemara in the previous summit had a very similar discussion, but there it was revolving around Batei Arechoma, and the Gemara says, no, that's not what the Brisa means. The Brisa is referring to Batei Chatzeirim, the houses in the unwalled cities, Ustei Achuz, and the ancestral fields. And the Gemara says, Batei Chatzeirim behedik sibuhu. Again, like the previous Amud, the Gemara says, how could it be the Brisas including Batei Chatzeirim, the houses in the unwalled cities? It's already an explicit pasuk, Al Stei Ha'aretz Yechashev. It says that the Batei Chatzeirim are the same thing as the ancestral fields, and we know there's a concept of relatives redeeming in those situations. And the Gemara says, Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, again, similar to the previous Amud, L'karov Karov Kodim over here, it's true that we already know this halacha, that the Batei Chatzeirim are similar to the Stei Ha'aretz, to the ancestral fields, and we know the halacha that the relatives redeem, but how do we know that the closest relative is the one that takes precedence in terms of the redemption? That's what we're learning from this pasuk of Yigolenu, Yigolenu, Yigolenu. It's saying that there's a concept of Karov Kodim, that the one who is the closest relative has precedence. And we will take a look at Tosas over here. Tosas says, Ahu l'karov kodim. Again, the Yigolenu is to say that the closest relative takes precedence. Ushlosha Yigolenu asi. And so now we have 3 Yigolenus. What are they all used for? Chad legufe. One is just for the simple understanding of the pasuk. V'chad bebate hachatzerim uves de achuz. And one is talking both about houses in unwalled cities and the ancestral fields, that we're going to say that the closest relative takes precedence. Techasa b'chad kra. That's all included in one pasuk. V'chad, and finally the last Yigolenu, lemedresh Yigolenu lazev. This was a drush on the previous Amud to say that in this case there is the redemption by the relative, meaning an Eved Ivri who sold to a non-Jew, but that doesn't apply to an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Jew. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, "V'hanirtza nikne beritzia." The Eved Ivri whose ear is pierced, he's acquired through the piercing of his ear. Tichsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, "V'rotza adona ves ozno b'martzea v'gomer." It says again, the master is going to pierce his ear with an awl, and through that creates the kinyan. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'kones atzmo b'yovel u'v'misas ha'adon." He acquires himself at Yovel, or with the death of the master. T'chsiv, as it's written, va'avodo, it says he's going to serve him. V'lo es haben, v'lo es habas. He's going to serve him and not his son and not his daughter. You see that he goes free with the death of the master. And then it says la'olam. It says va'avodo la'olam. He'll serve him forever. That means la'olamo shel Yovel. That means until Yovel. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Martzeya, it says that an awl is used to pierce the Eved Ivri's ear. Ein li ela Martzeya, I only know the use of an awl. Minayin l'rabos hasol v'hasira, how do we know to include? These are various kinds of thorns. V'hamachat, or a needle. V'hamakdeach, a makdeach is something that was used, it's an auger, it's used to drill in wood. V'hamachdev, that's a stylus, which is used to write by engraving. How do we know to include all of these items in terms of the piercing of the ear? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, V'lakachta l'rabos kol davar, it says you will take. That includes any item. L'rabos kol davar shenikach biyad, anything that's taken in the hand that can pierce an ear. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi says, Ma martzeya miyuchat shel mateches, just like a martzeya is unique, that it's made out of metal, af kol shel mateches, so too it has to be anything that's made out of metal. If it's not made out of metal, then it can't be used for the piercing of the ear by the Eved Ivri. Davar acher, another explanation, hamartzeya, why does it say hamartzeya? Lohavi hamartzeya hagodol, that comes to include the large martzeya, the large awl. And the Gemara will explain further on what it means, hamartzeya hagadol. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Yudon berivi hayadoresh, Yudon, who was the great one of his generation, he would darshan, kishein rotzim ein rotzim ela b'milsa, when they pierced the ear of the Eved Ivri, they only pierced the earlobe of the Eved Ivri. But the Chachamim say, Ein Eved Ivri kohen ear, so we know that an Eved Ivri was a kohen, he doesn't get his ear pierced, because that makes him have a blemish. V'im tomer b'milsa hem rotzim, and if you're going to say that it's the earlobe that is pierced, Heich Eved Ivri kohen yeyasa balmum, how does that make an Eved Ivri who's a kohen a balmum? Because it's not considered a blemish to have the earlobe pierced. And therefore the Chachamim say, you see from that when we pierce the ear, it obviously is in the upper part of the ear where there's cartilage, which would create a mum. And the Gemara continues, B'mai kamiflagi, what are they arguing about? Going back on Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rebbe. Rebbe said that it has to be something that's made out of metal that's used to pierce the ear. What is that machlokas? The Rebbe dorish klalu prati, because Rebbe darshans in the form of klalu prat, v'lakachta klal, martzeya prat, biozno vadeles chazaru klal. When it says v'lakachta, that's a generalization, martzeya is a specification, biozno vadeles is another generalization, and the rule is klalu pratu klal, iyat hadan elakena prat. Anytime you have a klalu pratu klal, it has to be similar to the prat. Mahaprat meforish shel mateches, af kol shel mateches. Just like the prat is made out of metal, so too it's anything that is made out of metal. Rabbi Yossi darish ribuye u'miyute, but Rabbi Yossi he darshans ribuye and miyute, inclusions and exclusions. V'lakachta riba martzei amiet bioznu vadelas chazav riba. V'lakachta is an inclusion, martzei is an exclusion, bioznu vadelas is another inclusion. Ribo miet v'riba riba hakol. When you have a riboy miyut and riboy, that's considered to include everything. My Rabbi kol mili, what's included? Everything is included. My miet, and what is excluded? Miet sam. What's excluded is, let's say, ointment that's corrosive is used and it's put on the ear to put a hole in the ear. That would not be counted in terms of the halach of nirtza, of the piercing of the ear. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Hamartzeya lohavi martzeya godel. It said that Hamartzeya is to include the large martzeya. My mashma, what exactly is implied over here? Kido Amar Rav, it's like Rava says. When it talks about the prohibition of the gid hanosh, it says in the pasuk hayorich, by the thigh, and we understand that to mean hamiyumenis shabiyorich. We understand that to mean the special of the two thighs, meaning the one that's the right side. Rashi says hayorich miyumen shabiyorich beperek gid hanosha. This is in perek gid hanosha. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein noag ela ba'achas. Rabbi Yehuda says it only applies to one of the gid hanoshes. Vadas machras shel yamin. It makes sense to say it's on the right side. V'yolef lamehei. He learns it out from the letter hey. The hayorich in the word hayorich. V'dorish hayorich chashuva shabirechos. Hayorich means the most important of the thighs. That's what we darshan from hayorich, and so therefore hachinami. That's also what we're saying over here when we say hamartzeya means martzeya hagadol, the large awl. Hamartzeya means miyuchot shebemartzoy, and when we say hamartzeya, it means the one that is special. It means the martzeya that's considered to be important, not just any martzeya. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. We said above, Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Yudon berivi hayadorish, Yudon, who was the great one of the generation, with darshan kishein rotzin ein rotzin ala b'milsa. When they pierced the ear, it was the earlobe. The Chachamim Omer, and the Chachamim say, Ein Eved Ivri kohen nirtz, and Eved Ivri who is a kohen does not get his ear pierced, b'mnei shanasa balmum, because that would make him have a blemish. And the Gemara says, V'yasa balmum, so let it be that he has a blemish. What's the big deal? Amar Rabba bar Rav Shela, Rabba bar Rav Shela says, Amar Krutz, because the pasuk says, V'shavel mishpachto. It says that the Eved returns to his family. L'muchzak shebe mishpachto means he has to return to the same status he had with his family before, and therefore it would be a problem if the Eved Ivri was a Kohen and he got his ear pierced, and that was a blemish. That would be problematic. He would not be returning to his original status. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Eved Ivri Kohen Mausha Yimser Lo Rabo Shifcha Kananis. By an Eved Ivri who was a Kohen, what's the halacha in terms of the master giving him a Shifcha Kananis in order for him to have children, to have more avodim for the master? Chiddushu, this is a Chiddush, this idea over here that you're allowed to marry a Shifcha Kananis if you're an Eved Ivri, that's a Chiddush, Loshna Kohanim, Veloshna Yisrael, therefore it shouldn't make a difference by Kohanim or Yisrael, it should be permitted whether the Eved Ivri is a Kohen or Yisrael. Odilmor, maybe Shani Kohanim, maybe Kohanim are different, Hol Veriba Behena Kosa Mitzvahs Yiseris, because the pasuk has many extra mitzvahs when it comes to Kohanim, and so maybe it's not appropriate that the Eved Ivri Kohen should marry a Shifcha Kananis. Rav Amar Mutter, Rav says it is Mutter, Shmuel Amar Aser, and Shmuel says it's Aser. Shmuel says it's prohibited for the Kohen to be with the Shifcha Kananis. And the Gemara continues, Amar Le Rav Nachman Le Rav Anon. Rav Nachman said to Rav Anon, Ki havisu beimar Shmuel, when you were by the house of Master Shmuel, Biskamudre Tlalisa, were you playing with tokens, meaning were you not paying attention? My time alo semru le meha, why don't you bring a proof from the following? When Shmuel said that it's Aser, when Shmuel said that we don't give the Eved Ivri Kohen a Shifcha Kananis, you should have said as follows. We said above, V'chachamim, that the Chachamim say, Ein Eved Ivri Kohen nirtzum if nation nasabal mum, that the reason why an Eved Ivri Kohen does not get his ear pierced is because that makes him have a blemish. Now, V'yim Tomer Ein Rabba Moser Lo Shifcha Kananis. Now, if you're going to say that the master does not give a Shifcha Kananis to an Eved Ivri who's a Kohen, so typically, so you could have had another reason why the Eved Ivri Kohen doesn't get his ear pierced. Because in order to get the ear pierced, the Eved Ivri has to say, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children. And over here, if you're saying the Eved Ivri Kohen doesn't have the wife and children, doesn't have the Shifcha Kananis, he can't make the statement. So of course, the Eved Ivri Kohen is not going to get his ear pierced. Veleka, you don't have these things, you don't have a Shifcha Kananis. According to Shmuel, there is no Shifcha Kananis by an Eved Ivri Kohen, and so therefore, it seems from the Chachamim that they're not bringing that proof, so it seems that really the Eved Ivri Kohen does have a Shifcha Kananis. It seems to be a proof against Shmuel. Sulo Midi, you don't need any further proof than this. And so therefore, that's what Rav Nachman said to Rav Anon, it must be not like Shmuel. On the basis of what the Chachamim say, it must be not like Shmuel. It must be that the Eved Ivri Kohen is able to be given a Shifcha Kananis. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Kohen Mao be Yefas Toar, what's the halacha if a Kohen is a soldier? Can he take a Yefas Toar, that's the beautiful woman that's a captive? Chiddushu Loshna Kohen Veloshna Yisrael. On the one hand, we can say that the entire concept of taking this non-Jewish woman is a Chiddush, and therefore it doesn't make a difference if it's a Kohen or it's a Yisrael, it's going to be mutter even if the soldier is a Kohen. Odilma, or maybe Shani Kohanim, maybe Kohanim are different, Toel Veriba Behen Mitzvahs Yiseris, since the Torah has many mitzvahs for them, therefore this would be prohibited, and the Kohen who's a soldier cannot take a Yefas Toar. And the Gemara says it's a machlokes amoroim. Rav Amar Mutter, Rav says it's Mutter, Shmuel Amar Aser, and Shmuel says it's Aser. And the Gemara says, Bebia Rishona, with the first act of relations that he has with the Yefas Toar, the Kuli Almalo Pligi Deshari, everybody agrees that's permitted. The Lo Dibra Torah Ela Keneged Yetzer Hara, because the Torah only spoke corresponding to the Yetzer Hara. In other words, the whole reason why Yefas Toar is permitted is because the individual has a Yetzer Hara for it when he's in the war, and that Yetzer Hara applies equally to a Kohen and to a non-Kohen, and therefore it's permitted Bia Rishona. Ki pligi b'bia shniya. The whole machlokas is, what if there would be an act of relations the second time? Rav Amar Mutter, Shmuel Amar Aser. And that it's a machlokas amoroim. Rav says it's Mutter and Shmuel says it's Aser. Rav Amar Mutter, Rav says it's Mutter hol v'ishtaria ishtari. Since it was permitted, so it remains permitted. Shmuel Amar Aser, and Shmuel says it's Aser do hahave lo gioris, because she's considered to be a gioris, she's considered to be a convert. The gioris lo kohen lo chazi, and the halach is a gioris is not fit for a kohen, and therefore it's not allowed. And again, that's specifically talking about Bia Shniya. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that have the following version, a different version of the above machlokas, but Bia Shniya Kuli Amalo Pligi. The second Bia, there's no machlokas, the Asira, everybody agrees it's prohibited by Bia Shniya, the Havala Gioris, because she's considered a Gioris, that both Rav and Shmuel agree to. Ki Pligi Bia Rishona, the machlokas is, by the Bia Rishona, the first act of relations, Rav Amar Mutter, the Halo Dibra Torah Ela Keneged Yetzer Hara. Rav says it's Mutter, because the Torah is speaking corresponding to the Yetzer Hara, again, like we said above. Ushmuel Amar Aser, and Shmuel says Aser. Why? Kol hechad de karina bei v'havesel toch beisecha. Anytime when you can read the pasuk, meaning you can apply the pasuk, which says that you're going to bring her into your home, meaning that you can take her as a wife, so to speak. So then karina bei v'ra'isa bashivya. So then we also can read the pasuk. We also can apply the pasuk of, and you're going to see the captive woman. You'll take her, meaning to say, if bia shnia does not apply, if bia shnia is aser, so then bia rishon is also going to be aser. If you're not able to be v'havesel toch beisecha, then you're also not able to be v'ra'isa bashivya. Kol hechad de lo karina bei v'havesel toch beisecha. Anytime you cannot apply the pasuk of v'havesel toch beisecha, if you can't have bia shnia, lo karina bei v'ra'isa bashivya. So then we don't have the application of the pasuk of a v'ra'isa bashivya, and that's why Shmuel says, since the bia shnia is going to be aser in this version, so too bia rishona is going to be a problem. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, V'ra'isa bashivya, it says in the pasuk, you're going to see among the captives, b'shas shivya. What that means is, at the time of the captivity, at the time she is in captivity, that's when you're going to see her. And Rashi explains, b'shas shivya, at the time of the captivity, im nasan mitchila einav ba, v'lo shelakacha l'mochro l'shifcha v'yachar kach nasan einav ba. What it means to say is that from the outset, the person saw her and wanted to take her, wanted to have relations with her, not that he originally took her in order to sell her for a shifcha, and then later decided that doesn't count in terms of the halacha of Yefas Torah. It has to be v'shas shivya. Eishes, and then it said in the pasuk, Eishes, v'afilu Eishes ish. That means to say, even if she is an Eishes ish, even if she's a married woman, Yefas Torah, it says she's a beautiful woman, and the idea of that is lo dibra Torah ela keneged Yetzer Hara, the Torah is speaking corresponding to the Yetzer Hara, and the idea is mutav sheyochlu Yisrael basar. It is preferable that Klal Yisrael should eat the meat. And Rashi explains, Yefas Torah, a beautiful woman, mashma shemitoch shemizgare bo yitzro machmas yofya. The point is that the pasuk sounds like it's saying, because of the fact that he has a Yetzer Hara, because of her beauty, he tirolo, that's the reason why this is mutter, uvakushi, and the point is that it was allowed with difficulty. Ela demut of sheyochlu Yisrael basar temusa shchuta, is just that it's better that Klal Yisrael should eat from meat, which is the animal's going to die, but at least it was shechted. Basar misukenes shchuta, meaning again, it's an animal that's in danger of dying, but it was shechted. Even though that might be considered to be disgusting to have that kind of meat, but it's better to have that, v'lo yochlu basar temusos, and not to have the meat of an animal that died, la'achar sheyemusu v'yunavelos, meaning after the animal just died, and now it's an avela, that would be far worse, and so that's why this is allowed, this halacha by the Yefas Torah, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph.